Okay, this is chapter 12, Manifest Destiny. These were your vocab words from earlier. Okay, your objectives for this section, section 1, across the wide Missouri, are that you should be able to explain how and why people migrated west during the era of Manifest Destiny, trace the series of events leading up to Texan independence, and name the 3 major western trails. If you take a look here, these are the subheadings, the major subheadings and headings for section 1. You should have your questions created for these. Okay, Manifest Destiny. Where does this term come from? And what does it mean? Okay, Manifest Destiny is pretty much America's belief that it was just their obvious destiny, that God had provided for them this whole continent, and we were to stretch across it and occupy all of it. And this was something that we'd been doing, right? We had been spreading out little by little, always pushing the frontier, right? Pushing the boundaries. It just didn't have a name until about 1845. Excuse me, when this journalist, John Lewis O'Sullivan, this is his quote here, said, "Our manifest destiny is to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent, which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federated self-government entrusted to us." And so that's where the term comes from. Okay, if you guys remember from last chapter, or sorry, probably before that, right, chapter 9, the United States and Great Britain had agreed to jointly occupy, so both of them occupy, the Oregon Territory. If you look in your textbook on page 239, you can see what the Oregon Territory looked like, what the British claim their territory should extend to, and then you can also see what the American claim to that territory was, where they felt their claim should extend to. Initially, the British do more in this area to develop it, but it's pretty far away from England. You don't have a lot of British settlers there, so it's not very densely populated. And we'll eventually see this spur of settlement from American missionaries out to the Oregon Territory to preach to the Indians. And a couple of these famous couples here you want to know Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. They're going to end up living in what is today northern Idaho. They'll have some success with the Nez Perce Indians. Narcissa will use like pictures to try to help illustrate the gospel. But eventually, they're going to try to reach a different group, the Cayuse Indians, and they're eventually going to actually be murdered in 1847 during a raid. Okay, and they're also friends here with Henry and Eliza Spalding, who will go out to Idaho and work with the Nez Perce as well. So you just kind of want to know that missionary efforts were really the first push out to Oregon. Okay, so in 1841, you have about 1,000 settlers coming to Oregon, and within 2 years, that number is going to triple. So now the Oregon Territory has become much more American, and the British have kind of lost their claim on it. And the Americans are not going to be as willing to share the Oregon Territory with the British. Okay, looking at Texas. So Texas is a really interesting place. It's the only state that was pretty much its own country for a while. And a lot of the reason why we're talking about Manifest Destiny and the push west is this is all going to lead us up to the Civil War and sectionalism. And as we're growing, there's going to be a lot of concerns about the spread of slavery, especially in a place like Texas. But I'm getting kind of ahead of myself. So in 1822, Stephen Austin, so you know Austin, Texas, named after Stephen Austin, leads a bunch of American settlers, and he has permission from the Spanish government to go into Texas and settle. Once he's in there, though, the Mexicans in the Spanish territory overthrow the Spanish government, and Austin will ask the Mexicans, pretty much, he'll also ask them for permission to be there. He'll pledge his allegiance to the new Mexican government, so that they allow him and his people to stay. And pretty much what's popular in Texas is growing cotton and raising cattle. And by 1835, there's many more Americans living in the Texas area than there are Mexicans in that area. And that's not to say that there were no Mexicans living in the area. They're just now outnumbered by American settlers. So there are increased tensions between Mexico and Texas that have to do with taxes, immigration, limiting the amount of immigration, that are going to lead us to a break with Mexico. And we're going to get to the War of Texan Independence. Okay. Another leader, Sam Houston, so Houston, Texas, named after Sam Houston. He's going to want to fight back against Mexico. Texas is going to take up arms because they're going to, in Mexico, the government is changing very frequently, changing hands. The Constitution has been changed a few times, and the Texans kind of want to protect their rights and their boundaries under the Mexican Constitution of 1824. So they're going to take up arms to protect or to defend the Mexican Constitution of 1824. And Sam Houston is, he's for that. He's kind of radical in that sense. He doesn't mind going to war to get Texas. So General Santa Anna is going to be sent from Mexico City. He's going to approach San Antonio, where the Alamo is. And you have 183 guys in the Alamo, which is this fort. And in the fort, you have quite a few famous Americans that are part of that 183 defenders, like Davy Crockett. Sam Houston actually orders these guys to destroy the fort and fall back before Santa Anna gets there, but they decide to hold out and maybe give other forces falling back more time to get out of there, and be able to fight off the Mexicans. So the guys in the Alamo are able to hold out for 13 days, it's almost 2 weeks, before they're killed by the Mexicans. And that's where they get that battle cry, "Remember the Alamo." Okay? And that's what the men are going to be shouting at the Battle of San Jacinto, and they'll capture Santa Anna and force him to sign a document that recognizes that Texas is an independent state from Mexico. Okay, so why does Texas not become a part of the United States? Well, there's a lot of reasons for it. Your book kind of keeps it pretty simple. Andrew Jackson's president at the time, and he's fearful of war with Mexico. The United States is still not very strong. We don't want to go into war with another foreign country. There's also all of these anti-slavery tensions. If, we annex Texas, if we, accept Texas, is slavery going to spread out there? Then we have to talk about the balance of free states and slave states within Congress. And there's going to be a lot of bickering and maybe even civil war right then if we accept Texas. So Texas is actually its own republic for 10 years, which is a decent chunk of time. Doesn't belong to Spain or Mexico, doesn't belong to the United States technically. That's why Texas is kind of a unique place, a Lone Star State, right? Okay, looking at the trails west. So people kind of grab hold of this philosophy of manifest destiny. They want to go west. They want to go to Oregon, where it's very got great farmland, and they feel like they're going to make a better life for their families. So this is where we see things like the Oregon Trail. If you guys have ever played the game The Oregon Trail, and you get the picture of the pioneers with like the bonnets in their ox-drawn wagons, going across the mountains, right? Okay. But there was a lot of dangers. If you've ever played the game Oregon Trail, you know, like, you get bit by snakes and your wagon falls apart and your animals can die, and sometimes you can't find water. Sometimes the water that you can find is bad. It'll make you sick. Indians might raid your wagon train. Lots of people have mentioned, or it's been recorded in like journals and letters, that people had to kind of unpack their wagons on the way there. They realized that they brought a bunch of stuff that was not necessary, so you'd see like big pieces of furniture just along the trails. Really famous group of people, especially here in the state of Nevada, that illustrate how dangerous traveling out west is the Donner Party. If you've ever heard of them, they think that they're going to take a shortcut, and they actually end up stuck up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And the ones that survive it, it's winter, so it's freezing. The people that do survive, there's about 40 out of 87 people in the group that survive, end up surviving because they start to eat each other. They resort to cannibalism. So it's a pretty creepy, not so nice story of going out west. So not only do we want to know about the Oregon Trail, which is kind of the most popular trail, but you guys want to know about the Santa Fe Trail that goes across the Southwest. You can look in your books on page 244, and it shows you the picture of all these different trails. And the Santa Fe Trail is much more commercial, is more for trade than it was for, you know, pioneers trying to move. And then you also have the Mormon Trail, because that's how the Mormons fled from Illinois out to Salt Lake City, was along that path. So your SRQ check. Who first spurred American settlement of Oregon? Missionaries, the Whitmans in particular. Name 2 characteristics of Oregon that attracted settlers to that region. It had a lot of land, fertile soil, mild climate, beautiful country. Why did Andrew Jackson refuse to annex Texas? Well, he was scared of war with Mexico and of the anti-slavery tensions within Congress itself, within the United States. Name 3 dangers of traveling on the Western trails in the first half of the 19th century. You have your pick. Indian attacks, broken axles, broken wagon, death of an ox, bad weather. Using the text in the map, which of the 3 Western trails is described by the following phrases? Involved trade with the Spanish. The Santa Fe Trail. Had cutoffs that went into California. The Oregon Trail. The southernmost trail, again the Santa Fe Trail, and blazed primarily by a religious sect, the Mormon Trail. Okay, here's your paragraph shrink words. Make sure that you actually do this because I do check for them. Oregon, Manifest Destiny, Texas, and missionaries. So this would be a good point to pause. Take note of the time where you pause this video. You do have a vocab quiz tomorrow, and I'll ask you a few questions from this. A bonus question might be, I am scared of robots and bunnies. That is not your vocab quiz information, so don't even try to take it. Okay, here we go into section 2, politics and protocol. These are the headings and subheadings. Make sure that you have the appropriate questions for them. Okay, so William Henry Harrison dies very quickly after becoming president in 1841. So the vice president, John Tyler, ends up as president. He's referred to as his accidency because no one really ever intended for him to be president. He was kind of barely vice president. Henry Clay, who is the leading Whig, who's the leader of the party that Tyler belongs to, thought that he would be able to kind of persuade and guide Tyler, that Tyler would submit to what Henry Clay said, but Tyler actually turns out to be just not so easily, I can't think of the word right now. Sorry guys, it's late. Tyler just doesn't go along with Henry Clay, unfortunately, for Clay. So he'll veto a lot of what the Whigs want, and they'll actually pretty much vote him out of the Whig political party. So that's pretty much like, let's say you have Obama not doing what Democrats want, and they vote him out of the Democratic Party. He can't be a Democrat now. So anyway, Tyler will vote he'll veto measures for higher tariffs. Remember, tariffs are taxes. He'll veto the new national bank. He'll veto internal improvements. So he's not very well liked. Okay, his entire cabinet, remember the cabinet are these advisors, will resign in the fall of 1841 after he's become president because they don't like him. Except for one person, and that's Secretary of State Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster, one of the reasons he doesn't is because he's in doesn't resign, is he's in negotiations with Britain over the territory of Maine. Remember, we had a border disagreement over Oregon. Now we're having one over Maine. You can look in your book on page 246, and it shows you kind of how much land we say we have, how much land the British say they should have, and then what our compromise ends up being. And this is the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. And you can kind of see it on this map. You can kind of see that the Americans claim up to that kind of bluish line. And then the British want to claim down here to that red line, and we kind of settle there on the yellow. Okay. So the campaign of 1844, Henry Clay is going to run for the Whig Party. Martin Van Buren will run for the Democrats. Tyler tries to get people to support him by making the annexation of Texas one of his campaign issues. But what ends up happening is the Democrats will choose James K. Polk. They'll nominate him. He's considered a dark horse, which means he kind of comes out of nowhere. He's not like a real serious candidate. But Polk is not entirely unknown. He served in the House of Representatives for 14 years. He was Speaker of the House. He's kind of good friends with Andrew Jackson, so he's known as Young Hickory, because remember, Andrew Jackson was Old Hickory. And he's going to support the reoccupation of Oregon, that Oregon should be American, and that we should annex Texas. He ends up winning the election over Clay, who lost votes to an anti-slavery party known as the Liberty Party. And that's usually what happens if you see a party split over an issue, and it creates another third party. The party that split the votes usually won't win. You'll see that happen again and again in history. Okay, so Tyler, before he leaves office, before Polk comes in and replaces him, pushes through a joint resolution to annex Texas before leaving office. And a joint resolution, which is a vocab word, means that this action only required a simple majority in both houses. So he's able to accomplish that, and Texas becomes the 28th state in the Union. Okay, Polk will become known as the hardest working president in history. He works 18-hour days. He barely ever goes on vacation. And that really shows because it really has an effect on him because he dies 4 months after he leaves office. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the pictures. Sometimes they'll show you pictures of presidents before they went into office and then after they leave office. And you can really see anywhere from 4 to 8 years how much they really age. And it's kind of crazy because of how much stress the president has. Okay, promises that Polk makes. He promises to lower tariff. He wants to restore the independent treasury system. He wants to settle the Oregon question, meaning, is Oregon American? Should we be sharing it with Britain? How much of Oregon really belongs to us? And he wants to acquire California from Mexico. So again, manifest destiny, we're trying to stretch out. In 1846, we signed a treaty that helps set the 49th parallel as a boundary to the Pacific Ocean, and Britain gets to keep Vancouver Island. And that's the compromise that we reach over Oregon. Okay, here's your SRQ check. Why was Tyler unpopular with the Whig Party? Well, he was an anti-Jackson Democrat. He opposed the Whig platform. He didn't do what the Whig leaders wanted. Who received most of the disputed territory in Maine under the provisions of the Webster-Ashburton Treaty? We actually did. You can tell that by looking at the map. Why did Tyler annex Texas through a joint resolution of Congress rather than a treaty in the Senate? Well, a treaty would have required 2/3, and the resolution only needed a simple majority. What were James Polk's 4 goals of his administration? Just went over these. He wanted to lower the tariff, restore the independent treasury system, settle the Oregon question, and acquire California from Mexico. Where did extreme American expansionists want to draw the Oregon boundary, and where did Britain originally contend it should be drawn? What became the actual boundary? And that question there is not really relevant that you guys get that. Just like if you saw the map, you kind of understand what that looks like. I don't need you to know the actual numbers there. Okay, so this is a good time again to